You have found the Lines Injury Podcast for NFL Week 15. Last month of the season. Can you believe that, Will Carroll?
I cannot. I mean, literally time is flying. We're having fun, and we're having a whole bunch of injuries, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Unfortunately, it's a violent game. My name is Steven Andress, as mentioned here with Will Carroll, 20 years experience covering NFL injuries, both as a journalist, both as a correspondent and an advocate for the team. He's worked directly with professional teams, not only in football, but other sports as well. He's also the author of The Science of Football, available everywhere books are sold. It makes a great stocking stuffer. Shameless plug.
I was just about to say that. Thank you for the plug. Yeah, that and Science of Baseball also available. Get both.
Yeah, absolutely. So Will's got his weekly column up at thelines.com, giving us fantastic insight every week of the season, not just who's injured and whether they're playing or not, but the context of these injuries. And if they're going to play, how effective can they be playing hurt? As we know at this point in the season, a lot of these guys are not 100%. So, but we're going to start with a major headline among quarterbacks this week, and I think it took most of the betting market by surprise that Mike White, the Jets starting quarterback, is in fact not playing in this game this week against the Detroit Lions in what seems to be kind of a loser goes home. This is major for both teams' playoff opportunities here. Mike White took a couple of, WWE style shots to the midsection last week, and he has not been cleared, Will, so it's going to be Zach Wilson.
Yeah, that was a little surprising in and of itself that they went with Wilson instead of Flacco. But Mike White, if you watched the game, if you saw the highlights, he took two brutal shots. Just clean, not dirty. A lot of people have said it was that dirty. I don't think so. Watching it back,
I don't think so either.
Just, especially that last one, Milano just had a clean shot, put his shoulder in him. He was wearing rib pads, but they were old style rib pads. So people are confused. How did he get cleared to come back if he had fractured ribs? Well, the question is, there were two big hits, and he didn't come back after the second one. He stayed down. He was in clear pain. In the first one, I think he just got the wind knocked out of him. Haven't been able to confirm that, but if you've ever had that, it's really uncomfortable. But what we have is what's called an occult fracture, which sounds kind of spooky, a Halloween thing. But what it means is it's just a hidden fracture. When you take an X-ray, if you've ever had one, you go to the hospital, the doctor will order a view, which is a certain way he wants to see it. And with X-rays at the stadium, they just don't have a lot of time. They're going to do one, maybe two views, especially for a player they're trying to see if they can get back in. And sometimes they miss things. Either it's a small fracture or it's hidden behind something. Sometimes, there can be fluid involved if there's swelling. So there's a lot of reasons you don't see it initially. He had a CT later, so I don't think it's a big fracture, but the doctors didn't clear him. And that's the end of that discussion. If you have a rib fracture and the doctors are saying, hey, we're just not sure about that. One more big hit like that, pads or not, it's not going to be good. And you're going to have internal organs and, most importantly, your lungs at risk of being punctured. So that's out. Question is, how long is he going to be out? What's Zach Wilson going to do? Is it going to matter if they lose this game? We've seen what Wilson can do. Opinions vary. I've been impressed with White. He's kind of bounced around, but seems to fit that offense and understands what's going on. So honestly, I think he gets his job back if he's ready to go next week. I don't know if he's got a future. There's going to be teams looking for quarterbacks. So do you put him in that mix of backup quarterbacks that might have a better situation, like Garoppolo, like Tyler Huntley, who has his own issues? But with White, we just got to wait to see whether this fracture heals up. I don't know how much you can take Wilson off for points because he has put up points.
I can tell you what the market thought. I can tell you what the market thought, man. The Jets were up to a 2-point favorite in this game, close to the look ahead of 3, despite the Lions' resurgence and all the points they put up lately against, granted, some bad defenses. And it went Now minus 1.5 for the Lions. So mostly through some meaningless numbers here. We're under the key number of 3. But for what that's worth, the Jets were a 2-point favorite with Mike White presumed the quarterback. And now they are a 1.5 point dog at home against the Lions. And I did bet the Lions the minute I heard about this. Even though I think this is a much tougher matchup against the Jets defense for the Lions, until Zach Wilson shows me he's not a bottom 2 quarterback in the National Football League, if he's on the field and the spread is small like this, I'm betting on the other team, especially a Lions offense that's looked as good as it has.
Exactly. The question I have, he lost a lot of games, but he was over most of it until that he went into that big slump, which cost him his job. They were under, I think, 3 or 4 straight times. So I think he's going to put up points. They're going to have to throw. The other question with the Jets is it's not just that they're back to Wilson. It's that this team has been beaten down. They're down to their 3rd wide receiver, their 3rd running back. They've got some defensive issues as well. So this is a team that's just been beaten up, and they're going to have to figure that out. I think when we look at both New York teams, when we look at both LA teams and a couple other teams, we've got to take a really hard look at what they're playing on. And we've seen, obviously, LA has had problems with that SoFi turf. The same is true in New York. And I think these guys are just being beat up. One of the things I want to know, and these are supposed to be tested every week, is whether or not these stadiums are just harder. It goes beyond the turf. If you watch games, like I know anybody watching this show does, you see that kind of puff behind somebody when they cut or they drag a foot, and that's the substrate, which is usually it's either coconut, oddly enough, or which is more the white sandy looking stuff, or it's rubber, which is basically recycled tires, and that substrate is what's underneath. And so sometimes you'll get a bouncy stadium, and sometimes you get kind of like the old Montreal stadium where it's basically carpet over concrete. Are they preparing that properly? If they're testing it, are they testing it in multiple locations? Because when you watch the way that White landed, it wasn't just the hit from Milano. And again, clean hit. I don't think he drove him into the turf, but when he landed, he just ragdolled. It was quite the hit, getting hit initially, and then once he hit the ground. So I do have questions about that as well.
Yeah, so it's not just Mike White, as you mentioned. Corey Davis is out, the number 2 wide receiver. Elijah Moore will get more snaps. Quinnen Williams didn't practice again today on Friday, but they are not quite ruling him out. So game time decision on him for the Jets defensive line. Moving forward here, we have Saturday football this week, and one of those games is the Cleveland Browns hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson still is not going to play in this one, but Tyler Huntley did clear the concussion protocol, Will.
Yeah, that's what we expected. Normally you see this on Friday, sometimes on Saturday. With the Saturday game, they're obviously not going to wait on that. That comes down to the independent consultant. And one of the things you'll occasionally see is when they don't have a complete handle on the situation, you can't retake the test within 24 hours. So if you took it on Saturday, you can't retake it in time to play on Sunday. So sometimes they'll do it on Friday, and then you could take it again on Sunday if you have access to your consultant, which most teams do. So with Huntley, simple concussion, cleared the protocol, went through it, as quickly as you can normally. So we've got to expect he's going to play normally. Obviously, you worry about that. We've seen some repeat concussions this year, which is always worrisome. With Lamar Jackson, we knew he wasn't going to play fairly early in the week, but what we haven't seen is any progress. When he injured the PCL, which is one of the main ligaments in the knee, there was a lot of talk. There was 1 to 4 weeks was the number they gave, and I was saying 2 to 6. I think this is interesting because we've had no indication that he's made progress. There's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes. There's no question he's doing therapy. There's no question they're doing all sorts of treatments and protocols. He's probably running at this stage, but we don't know if it's full weight. You can use a machine called an Alter G treadmill. Almost all the teams have one of these, which basically uses air to hold you up. so you're not putting as much weight. You can have as little as 40% of your weight. So, if you're Lamar and you're going about 225, you're only putting 110 pounds of weight, which gets you on your legs quicker. You often see this, especially with people coming back from surgery. So maybe he's in the pool. Heck, he's likely at least running lightly. The question is whether he's cutting, doing hard stops. But we haven't seen any of that progress. And I had expected, and said this in the Lions column, I had expected to see Thursday or Friday that he would be out there doing something. Not that he was going to play, but just so that we would see some progress. We haven't seen that. And if we don't see that by next week, I've got concerns about when Lamar is going to be back, and that's obviously huge for a Ravens team that's not only fighting for the playoffs, but for playoff position.
For sure. The Ravens are, as we record Friday afternoon, really depends where you shop. Sometimes they are plus 2.5. There are other shops that have them at plus 3. Obviously, the juice is going to switch on which number you have there. Total of 38 in this one. I'm kind of good with 2 strategies in this game, to be honest with everybody. I'm fine if you want to bet the Browns minus 2.5 here in the hopes that Deshaun Watson finally starts looking like he did from 2 years ago. I don't even think we need full Deshaun Watson. I think just a little bit better than what we've seen would be enough here to cover a short number. But then on the flip side, if you're not comfortable with that and you want to tease the Ravens up to 8.5 and a total with 38, I think that's a great strategy as well. I don't think the Browns are going to blow out the Ravens here against the Baltimore defense. So that's kind of my strategy in this one, a full breakdown on the Megapod as well. The other thing I just want to mention here, in addition to that, is the look-ahead line. If you mentioned that Lamar Jackson, in your opinion, is not showing great progress to potentially even get back for next week, the look-ahead line might be something to consider here with the Ravens. Yeah. The Ravens right now are minus 6.5 hosting the Falcons on the look-ahead line for Week 16. Obviously, Falcons with a quarterback change in Desmond Ridder. If he looks good and Tyler Huntley struggles again, and you're not optimistic that Lamar's getting back, then maybe Falcons plus 6.5 there it's more likely to go the other way as opposed to getting up to the key number of 7.
Yeah, I'm going to be very, very honest. I think Huntley is what he is. We saw last week they were what was the total, about 36. I don't know what's the under right now.
This week, week 15, we are looking at a total of 38.5, depending on where you go.
Right. That's I might go a little under that, so I'd take the under there. With Lamar, this is a 45, 46 point offense in total, and with Huntley, it's just not. He's about a touchdown worse every week. So this is one where you can definitely take that, but I sure like the idea of teasing this up. I don't think they're going to be blown out by any stretch of the imagination.
Division being
interesting one here.
2.
Yeah. I think the interesting one here, and this is one that a lot of doctors, team doctors that I've talked with over the last couple of weeks have been very interested in, is Deshaun Watson coming back. First, he hasn't been injured after being out essentially a year and a half, a little bit more, having no preseason. But how quickly would he see the game? I didn't know if it would come back. Not a lot of players sit out that long for any reason. We see guys who retire and come back a year. We see guys who have an ACL and essentially miss a full season, maybe a little bit more. But it appears that it's coming back slowly, but he's not so far behind that he's putting himself in danger. Obviously, any quarterback on any play, any player on any play, that can happen. But things seem to be coming back for him more quickly than a lot expected, which is giving us some idea of what can you do when a guy really hasn't seen the field, because that's one of the bigger questions about why we're seeing more injuries this season. They're being spread out over the course of the season, but players aren't playing at the start of the season and are essentially having 8-9 months off. Can you get used to being hit? There's actually a new study out that says yes, it's pretty important, and we're going to have to see whether that's the case. So Watson, at least in that case, is giving us something of a test.
I'm sorry if I look like I'm looking off to the screen while you're talking there, because we have some big development that just came in here. It was already on our rundown. I just locked in a bet based on this news. The Broncos have ruled out Russell Wilson with a concussion.
Yeah.
And we already know Kyler Murray is out for Arizona, but Colt McCoy has some experience there. He's dealing with, I believe, a neck issue. Is that right, Will?
Yep. Yeah, something of whiplash there.
Go ahead and take us through these two situations here.
Yeah, let's talk about Colt McCoy, because if you go down, what is it, Trace McSorley? That's the third guy there. There's the guy from Detroit that's been bouncing around as a backup as well. We know Kyler Murray's out. The ACL, he'll have that, and he's selecting a surgeon, but he's likely to miss the start of next season. So I think the Cardinals have some real questions. If Colt McCoy can't go, when you're down to your third, fourth quarterback, it gets really, really bad. They'll take that right up to game time, though. If he can possibly go, they want him to go. He did not look good last week, but that was a situation where you get thrown in. This is one where at least he's preparing. On the other side, Russell Wilson has a simple concussion. A lot of people were asking me about that knot that was apparent on his head. The first is, if you ever watched Peyton Manning wore his helmet so incredibly tight that he would have that pattern across his forehead from virtually the start of the game. Wilson does almost the opposite. You often see his chin strap undone. There are a lot of quarterbacks that do that. They're just uncomfortable having to yell with their chin tucked up underneath. Some guys have trouble getting volume with it. So he's got a loose helmet. Basically what happened is the padding, which is two-level, inside a helmet, there's a bunch of little pads, and they each have kind of two parts to it. The first part it's both foam, but one is soft foam to kind of cushion a blow, and the second is to make sure that the whole hard edge of the helmet doesn't come in, so it's much harder. What happened was he got a gap somehow, and when he got hit, that hard part came there was more of a gap, and so that hard part hit him, raised a little knot. If you watch boxing, that's an area where there's fluid to begin with. You've got to protect that joint and the temple. So not uncommon to see that. It's uncommon to have an unfitted helmet. For whatever reason, that was the case with Wilson. Who knows with him? But simple concussion. Ignore the knot. That's going to go away. That was probably gone within 24 hours. A little ice and he'll be fine. But the concussion, he's apparently still having symptoms and did not clear the protocol. I'm not sure how much they would have rushed this. I'm honestly, he looked better than he has a lot of weeks last week. So I don't think they were just saying, you're no good. We're going to see what Rippon can do this week. But I don't think they're going to really push to get him back from a concussion if he's showing even the slightest symptoms.
Yeah, to use a poker term, the Broncos are pot committed with Russell Wilson now. They're not benching him out of precaution. They gave him the monster contract and first round picks to Seattle. So he just hasn't cleared protocol. Hopefully, if you were watching live with us on Twitter, you're able to get the best of the number there before your books took it down, because I'm seeing a lot of books that have taken down that line for Arizona and Denver. Was able to just lock in here on the show with that news. Arizona +3. That's an insane number with Brett Rippon at quarterback. Already starting to see it move here. It's off the 3 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Over at DraftKings Sportsbook, I'm checking now to see where it is, but I imagine this is going to start moving back closer to a pick'em with Brett Rippon at quarterback. No chance this can be 3 with Russell Wilson not playing in this game. So hopefully you can still find a book if you're watching live and find that. Yeah, we are 2.5 everywhere. Wouldn't surprise me if we get even lower than that at this point on that spread.
Yeah, hey, Cardinals are really banged up beyond Murray, so you're going to find some good numbers.
For sure. Okay. Las Vegas Raiders come off that, like, another Josh McDaniels special, up 16-3 with 3 minutes left and blow a lead and lose the game in just impressive fashion. But their star player, Josh Jacobs at running back, is dealing with multiple injuries right now. and still leading the league in rushing, and might go over 2,000 yards from scrimmage this year. Really impressive what he's doing. But what have you seen? What do you know about what he's dealing with injury wise?
Yeah, you're worried about this because they've said this is a serious injury. They're dealing with it day to day, and yet he goes out and produces. You're like, well, he should just keep these. The problem is, I guess we'll call it T. Higgins syndrome. He could go out on any play. If you're counting on this guy to really push things forward and keep the Raiders in games at least, or give them these early leads, or if you're in your fantasy playoffs, it's tough to count on a guy who has serious injuries. He's got a calf injury, which is a muscle strain just above the Achilles. So they're watching that closely. Now he has a quad strain, which is up towards his hip. So he's having a harder time with long strides. And one of the things we saw last week, he wasn't as... I don't want to say he was reluctant, but he certainly wasn't changing gears as quickly. He was perfectly willing to have an 8, a 10, a 12-yard run rather than trying to stretch it out further around the side. I don't think it's bothering that much on push. He was getting a lot of initial holes. He's got some burst. He doesn't seem to have a ton of trouble cutting or stopping. So I'm curious whether it's just that extension that he feels when he's basically at a sprint, where that quad up towards the hip would really be affected. So I'm a little worried about it in that it hasn't gotten better week over week. I'm a little worried about it in that we don't know that those aren't, the gait change from the calf didn't cause the quad/hip injury. So I'm worried about him, but he's also productive. So basically, you got to play him like he did the last 2 weeks, and he was pretty darn good the last 2 weeks.
For sure. I went back through the injury reports, Will, to check. He has not put in a full practice since Thursday of week 12. It's been all limited practices since then.
I'm honestly not so worried about that because they're going to be load managing him. They're going to make sure he's getting beat up. As many touches as he's getting in both the run and the pass game, he's probably spending a ton of time in the ice bath. So when somebody like that is having an expanded load, doing more, having a big game, and they start taking him out of practice, I don't worry so much about that. It's the fact that week over week, if you're not re-injuring yourself, you should be better. And we're not seeing that, which tells me that calf really hasn't gotten any better, and playing is probably bad. Would a week off help him? Of course, but is that enough? I think they're at a point where they're saying, well, we got to have you now. We've got to take this risk, and then hopefully it won't get worse and knock him out. I think a lot of teams now are saying, I just hope we can get somebody through the end of the season, get them through the playoffs. Teams are fighting for that bye because that week off is so key with as beat up as most teams are right now.
Let's shift gears to the Cincinnati Bengals, who are dealing with a couple of nicked up wide receivers after finally getting Jamar Chase back, ironically enough. T. Higgins plays just, I think, one snap last week and then comes out. Tyler Boyd's dealing with a hand issue. We have the latest report from their Friday injury report, and T. Higgins with the hamstring is questionable. Despite practicing in full, their head coach, Zach Taylor, said he still feels confident that he'll play. How much he'll play, we don't know. This is a hamstring and a soft tissue injury. And then on the flip side there, I'm still trying to find some Tyler Boyd info here for you, but T. Higgins here is tough with the soft tissue.
I'm not worried about him. He dislocated his finger last week. They popped it back in.
Tyler Boyd, right?
So there was a question about whether it was broken just because we didn't really see the dislocation initially. So a lot of people were worried it was fractured, that they put him back in just because Higgins was out. But once the dislocation is popped back in, you're essentially okay. It still hurts a little bit. But I think he'll be fine. Higgins is the same thing. I saw an interview with him from yesterday after practice where he's like, yeah, it's so much better. I'm still worried because, he burned me once. So Higgins re-injured it in the pregame. and they still activated him and put it in there. He runs one play, and watching it back, you can see that he took like one step and was just like, nope, isn't going. So I'm curious who made that decision to activate him. I guess, you don't need the depth. It's not like he's hurting you on special teams or something. But I'm a little worried about it. But he seemed positive enough. It shouldn't have been a problem last week. As long as he doesn't do the same thing in pregame, and I'm sure they'll be watching him close. I think this is one of those situations where you better have your finger on the trigger because this could happen again. But, everything I've heard, everything I've seen has been positive for Higgins this week. And, Burrow having all three, I guess four with his tight ends, he's barely had them all year, and he's still been pretty darn good.
Let's do some quick hitters here as we wrap up. A couple of these names we've touched on in past weeks, but I think still important to mention them again. Teron Armstead from Miami. They've already lost one tackle to IR and Austin Jackson. Teron Armstead is playing hurt right now still, and obviously a pivotal game Saturday night in Buffalo in the snow.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this because, normally the cold isn't a big deal. You do worry about getting loose, and he's got two issues. First, he's got a bad toe. I don't know whether he got stepped on, whether that's the start of turf toe. You do worry about that, especially in the cold. The other is that pec strain really in his shoulder. He's got to get that out. He's got to be able to get that loose. And so keeping that warm, especially in between, I'm very curious to see how they do that because you can't put them on a bike. That's not going to help. They're probably going to have heat packs, some sort of something over it to try to keep it loose. But I do worry about Armstead this week. I normally don't with weather. Weather isn't nearly as big a deal, especially in injuries, as people think. But this is one of them where I am a little bit worried.
This is a teaser for me. I teased the Bills down to 1 with the weather. I don't really want to bet on even Buffalo to win by more than a touchdown with, they haven't been quite as sharp, and now you throw some weather into the mix. I do think they win this game, but I think teaser is probably the best betting angle this week. Early in the week, I didn't think the Eagles were ever coming back to 8.5, so I did a 6.5 point teaser at -130 to pair the Bills with the Eagles. But as we record right now, DraftKings does have the Eagles back to 8.5 here, so you can just do a 6 point teaser and only pay 120 on that. That would be my top pairing there against the Chicago Bears this week, who can't stop anybody. So that's the teaser angle for me on that one. Dallas Cowboys and the Eagles are playing next week on Christmas Eve, and it's the game that both cities have had circled for like 2 months now. This week, Dallas is playing Jacksonville. Our Eli Hershkovich likes Jacksonville. You can check that out on Beat the Closing Line from earlier this week on our YouTube channel. But Tyron Smith might be getting back here just in time after they lost Terrence Steele on the offensive line.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this. I think they definitely want to get him in there this week. Remember, he had hamstring surgery. They had to reattach a tendon that had come loose. This is significant surgery. So I'm very curious to see how he goes in. I don't think they want to throw him in straight up against Philadelphia. The Jacksonville pass rush was supposed to be better with all their draft picks. Hasn't been this year for a lot of reasons. But I think they want to get Tyron out there, see how he's moving, get him back up to game speed. It's interesting to me that the Cowboys, as good as they are, as close as they are, likely playoff position, fighting with the Eagles, surprisingly, with as good as the Eagles have been with only the one loss. I'm curious that they're willing this late in the season to make changes. I mean, I know Tyron Smith is a great tackle, but they've played pretty well without him. They haven't shown the need for another wide receiver, even with the injuries they've had. But they're about to sign Odell Beckham, who won't be ready, until a couple games into the playoffs. So unless you're going to go to the Super Bowl, you might not get much out of signing him, and that is not going to be a cheap signing, even as late as it is. So I'm real curious. McCarthy's, how much influence does he have on this? Is he saying, just bring me talent, bring me talent? Do they see something? Obviously both of these are good players, but I'm curious with wanting to make a change this late. It's much like I was talking about last week with Jimmy Garoppolo. If Brock Purdy is this good and healthy, do you switch back to Jimmy Garoppolo if he comes back and it's championship game time? I don't know. Certainly we've seen it before, but both of these guys are backups to begin with. So I'll be very curious to see that decision if we get there.
Do you have any concern for a couple of key players that they're facing this week on Jacksonville? Trevor Lawrence still dealing with a toe injury, and one of their best pass rushers, the number 1 overall pick, Trayvon Walker, back-to-back DNPs with an ankle.
Yeah, the ankle, I'm worried with Walker. Like I said, the pass rush just hasn't worked. We'll have to see whether or not he can go. We should have known today. I haven't seen a report on Walker, but at best, he's going to be a game time decision. That ankle really does bother him. Keeps him from locking down. He can get a start.
We've seen zaps his speed a little bit too, right off the line.
It does, but it's really more in the run game where he has to kind of set himself rather than just speed rush. With Lawrence, it's affected him. He's not running as much. I think it's more painful when he's running, but it hasn't affected him passing. Watched him very closely, did some analysis on his biomechanics. I don't think the toe is affecting his throws. It does affect him when he runs. So he's been both reluctant to just tuck the ball and run, and he's even been a little reluctant to scramble a bit. He's thrown the ball away a little bit quicker. Anything right at the 3-second mark, he's throwing it away rather than scrambling. And he's a more athletic guy than he looks. He's tall, he's kind of geeky, and got that long hair that bounces around. So he doesn't look as athletic as he actually is. So I do think the toe is affecting him there.
Best game of the year for him last week in terms of passing. So it didn't affect him too much after missing 2 days of practice last week. 368, 3 touchdowns, no picks. His best game of the year in terms of yards per attempt at 8.8. But to your point, only 7 yards rushing. And he's had several games this year with more than 20 yards rushing. So he was able to sneak one in at the goal line for a rushing touchdown. But in terms of the yardage and the number of rushing attempts that we typically see from him, it was definitely decreased last week for sure.
Yeah, and he didn't jump on that one. So I was very curious about that. I do think that toe is bothering him in certain ways, but he's adjusting. So I'm not concerned about him. He's definitely going to play, and maybe that's the game he needs to play.
Chargers all of a sudden look healthy and get, in my opinion, a Titans team that's going the wrong direction. I think some negative regression coming their way, just not as much talent. Even the running game is not going well. If you look at the advanced metrics from the past month, they haven't even been able to rely on Derrick Henry. So seemingly the Chargers team is getting closer to what we expected of them when healthy at the early part of the season, where a lot of us thought this was maybe a top 5 team in the NFL. Key players like Bryce Callahan, back-to-back limited practices after he was doubtful last week. Sebastian Joseph Day, the defensive tackle and the guy they signed and brought in to be a run stuffer, back-to-back limited practices with a knee after he was doubtful last week. Trey Pipkins on the offensive line, who stepped in nicely with a couple of key injuries there early in the season. Back-to-back limited practices with a knee after he was struggling to get on the field. So it seems to me, Will, that this team is getting even healthier than they were last week when they looked really good against Miami.
Yeah, again, West Coast, and we're recording before we get the final practice report on the Chargers. So this is definitely one to watch. Derwin James coming back. Here's the thing. It's all lower leg injuries. Ankles, knees. And again, we can talk about the SoFi turf. With the Titans, at least it's grass, but they've got another home game. They got to play at Indianapolis. I think that's next week. So they're going to be on the turf quite a bit. It isn't going to help. It isn't going to hurt. Kyler Murray certainly blew out his knee on grass. You're going to see that occasionally. But it's one where I do watch these. Everybody seems to be trending the right direction. If they get Pipkins back, that's obviously a big one. If they get James back, that's a big one. So many of these guys are important to them. Joseph Day, they don't have a lot of depth on the defensive line. So that's where you start worrying about it. And the linebackers are banged up as well. Obviously, Joey Bosa was going to be a big part of that, and he's not going to play the rest of the year. So getting Callahan back, getting Derwin James back, getting Joseph Day back, those would all be big ones. And hopefully we'll know that either today or at worst on game time. If they're active, they're going to play, and that would certainly indicate that they're healthy.
I bet the Chargers last week. I bet the Chargers this week. And I've already bet them again for next week against the Indianapolis Colts as well at under a field goal for this week and next week, -2.5 in both of those games. And I paid a little extra juice on that. I didn't mind. So I'm big on the Chargers right now. I believe in this team. And sure enough, I'm sure that like the Chargers often do to those that back them, they will somehow lay an egg at some point here and screw me. But I believe in this team when healthy, and they're finally healthy, and they looked really good. So I'm going to stick with them. I think they're trending in the right direction, and the Titans are just running out of bodies and running out of easy opponents to play, quite frankly.
Yeah, the Titans are an interesting case. And this is one where I was talking to a scout from another team who watched them, and he said, I think they're just worn down. I don't know if Vrabel's doing more physical practices, whether this is just the shape of the season for them, but they look worn down. Looking at the next gen stats, the team is slower. Henry doesn't have the same burst. They're not quick off the ball. Again, I don't know why this is the case, but people around the league are noticing it. And if they're wearing down more than other teams, that's certainly not a good thing, especially as we head here through the last few weeks, and you're just going to get more and more beaten up if you're not going to find a way to rest at this stage of the season. This is where these guys tend to break.
You're only making me more confident, Will. I like it. Maybe I might bet an alt line here on the Chargers.
Did I mention they're playing the Colts next week?
Yeah. Well, I bet the Chargers against the Colts next week too. So I'm liking what you're selling out there, man. I appreciate it. I love those next gen stats too. Just even more underlying information of what we see with our eyes on the field on Sunday. The last player we'll talk about here is the Giants and their star defensive lineman Leonard Williams. Did not practice the first 2 days. Latest reports from beat reporters as we record here Friday afternoon is that he looked good in the open portion of practice with the media. He is officially questionable on the injury report this week for Leonard Williams in a key rematch from 2 weeks ago against the Commanders.
Yeah, these quick rematches always strike me as you just saw him. It's going to be the same thing, but with Williams, it's a neck strain. It's actually a ligament in the back of his neck, and when you think about what a defensive tackle has to do, he's got to look up. He's going to get hit. It's going to get knocked around. It's going to be tough. So I think he's going to play. I'm curious whether they're going to stand him up, which would take some of that off, but also make him less effective. I'm curious if they'll try to angle him through. It's not like you can go out there with one of those old, like Brian Bosworth cowboy collars. Those don't work very well. So it's going to be tough. He's really going to have to suck this up. This isn't something you can shoot up. You can't go out there with a numb neck. It just doesn't work at all. So this is one where he's just going to have to figure out how much he can do, how much pain he's willing to take. But they need him. It's surprising that the Commanders, with theoretically a backup quarterback, with Brian Robinson, being kind of all over the place, Antonio Gibson being beat up. But that is going to be a key game and a very physical one.
The market is making their opinion very clear for this. You mentioned the weird scheduling quirk here. The Commanders play 2 games in a row against the Giants here with a bye in between. It's only the third time since the 1970 AFL-NFL merger that a team has played the same opponent 2 games in a row for the Commanders. Obviously, the Giants had a beatdown to the Eagles in between there where they looked bad. And I think this is interesting to me because this was around 3.5 at the start of the week, went to 4 pretty quickly, then to 4.5. And as we record here Friday afternoon, now I'm seeing 5s on the board, which is a dead number, as we know in betting. And if we get to 5, I'm not sure there'd be any reason to stop it from getting to 6. So if we get 6 here, it's an auto bet for me on the Giants after this was just 2.5 in the same game 2 weeks ago, albeit in a different stadium. But it's not like this is a hard road trip for the Giants down I-95. If they were 2.5 2 weeks ago, and the Giants covered 2.5 2 weeks ago in a tie, and nothing really quirky to me stood out in that game to make that, think that it was an anomaly that the Giants tied that game. I feel like I have to take them if it gets the 6 again here. So we'll see.
Exactly.
Keep an eye on this one.
Yeah, I simply don't get this because, I know they got beat the heck up by the Eagles, but the Eagles made pretty much everybody look bad.
Yeah, the Commanders are not the Eagles. The Commanders are not the Cowboys. The Giants aren't built to beat those elite teams in the NFL. They're going to get beat down. But the Commanders are not that.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously the Giants in the first year under Dable have made giant improvements. Is Daniel Jones going to be back? They've had some injuries. They traded away Kadarius Toney, which thinned them out a little bit at receiver. But this has been a decent enough team. They got Saquon Barkley back looking like Saquon Barkley. That always helps. This is one of those teams that I just feel like getting beat by a really, really good team is not the negative it seems often. The one I worry about is when a team comes in, absolutely steamrolls you, and just physically beats you up. We've seen games like that, and last week wasn't that. The Eagles beat them in every phase, but it wasn't an absolute physical beatdown where you saw guys, being carted off, that guys were left sucking wind. It was just a simple, they're more talented at this stage. The system works better with Jalen Hurts. So I think this is an overreaction to what people thought they saw, or maybe they didn't watch it and they're just looking at the number.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Commanders are coming off a bye, but I agree with you, Will. I think this is an overreaction. I think, say what you want about the state of the Giants roster, Taylor Heineke on the other side at quarterback for Washington is still among the league leaders in turnover-worthy plays, which means he basically has to play close to a perfect game to cover a spread like this to basically win by a touchdown at this point. That's asking a lot for him, for Heineke. So I have no choice at this point but to just see if this keep moving. If we keep getting more money in on Washington, then I'm going to wait for a 6 on the Giants here and be very thankful for it. This
is a game where my wallet wants to come out of my pants and just like, hell, this is the one. This is the one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing about Heineke too is he doesn't throw downfield. There are no explosive plays. Everything, average depth of the target is near the line of scrimmage, so it's methodical, which takes time off the clock. And with the turnover-worthy plays, if a couple of those don't go his way, then we're looking again at a very difficult game state situation for a team to win by a touchdown or more. So I'm back on the Giants here, most likely if definitely if it gets to 6, and I might still bet them at 5 or 5.5. If I do, it'll be in the Lines Discord channel, which you can find in the top right-hand corner of the lines.com homepage. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Lines Injury Podcast. Hope everybody enjoyed that. Hope it was useful. I learned a lot, as I do every week with you, Will. I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, thanks a lot, Steve.
Okay, everybody, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments who you are betting on this week in the National Football League. For Will Carroll, I'm Steven Andress. Best of luck with your bets in week number 15.